I'm Margaret Webb with Daily Xtra, and we are thrilled to have Sarah Waters on our show today. Sarah blasted onto the literary scene in 1998 with Tipping the Velvet, which is slang for
cunnilingus.
Cunnilingus. It was about an oyster girl turned music hall performer turned rent boy. 6 novels and 1 million copies later, she arrives at the International Festival of Authors here in Toronto with her latest novel, The Paying Guest. And it has all the hallmarks of a Sarah Waters novel. It's a historical fiction, it's a lesbian picaresque, it's a feminist Dickens, as some of the critics have called it. And I will add my 2 cents and say it has broad appeal, which the pun is intended and both not intended. Critics have explained your incredible success by saying that you're one of the best storytellers of our time. And I'm curious to know what attracted you to this particular story of The Paying Guest.
Well, it's set in 1922 in London, and which I realised once I began my research, it was just a sort of really fascinating time. You know, people coming out of the war, feeling exhausted. It was an unhappy time with lots of tensions around returning servicemen, were kind of disgruntled. There were tensions between men and women, between the classes, between the generations. But it was also a time that was beginning to move forward and become very modern in a way that we would understand the term. The Paying Guest was kind of inspired by a real-life murder story, the Ilford murder of 1922. It's not in any sense a retelling of that story, but it was a kind of classic murder story. A wife, unhappily married, a husband and a male lover. The male lover killed the husband, but the wife, Edith Thompson, was put on trial for incitement and was hanged. Yeah, it was kind of a tragic, extraordinary case. But that triangle really fascinated me, and of course it's a very heterosexual triangle. But I began to think, well, what would happen if the lover was a female? What would that do to this sort of traditional murder story?
One of the ways that you render this lesbian relationship visible is with some pretty hot sex scenes. And I just have to read a line here. She seemed to have lost a layer of skin, to be kissing not simply with her lips, but her nerves, her muscle, her blood. But your sex scenes, while they're very hot and beautifully written, they're very funny too. I mean, there's often a humorous undercut, like for instance, Lillian will say, well, with a movement of her hand, as if women made sapphic gestures to her every day. Is there something inherently lesbian about sex and humor?
I think sex and intimacy often has a comic element to it, you know. That's exactly what we don't tend to see when we see sex represented on screen, say on TV or in films, where it tends to be seamless, perfect, you know, everything happens in the right order at the right time. And, you know, sex is sometimes like that, but on the whole, in real life, sex is much more untidy than that. And there are those moments when you begin to realise that you've got cramp, or, you know, you're in an odd position. And those are what makes sex interesting. I've tried to do justice to the untidiness of sex in the books, as well as hopefully keeping it exciting.
I talked to my friends about what they loved about your work, because you have really amazing fans that just, they will say, I just love your work. And they said, you don't give up the finely wrought sentence for the plot, and you don't give up the plot for the finely wrought sentence.
That's really nice to hear.
And I'm wondering, where does story start for you? How do you put together a story? Because you write doorstoppers. I mean, 6 novels in how many years that are...
There's a lot of words.
There's a lot of words in your books. How do you even start to put together a story?
Well, the story for me is always at the heart of a book, and I'm always happiest when I have my story quite well worked out in advance. It gives a kind of skeleton to the book. With the last book, The Little Stranger, I even had practically the very last scene, you know, in my head the whole time I was writing. I was just working towards it. What changes, though, what emerges for me is characters, characterisation, how the characters feel about the things I need them to do, how they feel about each other, how they feel about themselves, and that takes some figuring out, like kind of getting to know the characters really, or at least getting to know how they should be for the purposes of this story. Sort of bit by bit, trying out scenes, I'll get a sense of what my characters should be saying to each other.
We're getting to the serious part of the interview now, which is when I ask you, what's it like to be a famous lesbian author? What everybody really wants to know.
Well, you mentioned my fans earlier and said how wonderful they are, and actually, you know, they are, and they have been right from the very beginning. It took a while for Tipping the Velvet to become a mainstream success. It wasn't really till it got on TV in 2002, but in the 4 years, you know, following its publication, it got a very committed lesbian readership, and that was really delightful.
But you also have a cross-dressing readership, both, you know, All puns intended. But a crossover readership, you have a very wide appeal.
Yeah, I do, and that's wonderful. I mean, every author wants to be read by as many different kinds of people as possible. But nevertheless, it's really important to me that I've retained, you know, that core lesbian readership, and that I'm very, you know, I know with the last book that there wasn't any lesbian content, and that disappointed some of my readers. This novel, you know, has lots of lesbian stuff going on in it. So I've made up for it, haven't I? But it is, yeah, it's important to me that that I have those readers.
And you also have to deal with interviewers. Excuse me, I have to reach this, giving you presents.
Oh, I wasn't expecting that.
So you have to open that.
What is this?
What is it with the radishes in the
so
paying
you like
guests?
radishes? They go on a picnic. Francis and Lillian go on a picnic to the park.
and Francis takes eggs and radishes?
They have this perfect meal when they get there. Lillian has taken jam tarts, little fancy sandwiches. Francis has taken hard-boiled eggs, cold tea, and some radishes, which are very, very British, you know.
Are they say British or symbolic of something? I'm not sure what.
They're very tart, aren't they? They're
Yes,
very,
they
they've got
are.
a real bite to them, radishes. I like that idea. Francis has
hot?
got that kind of. They're hot.
Yeah.
Great. They're small but perfectly formed. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.